So good evening, everyone. I see some new people here tonight that I haven't had a chance to visit with before. So I'll introduce myself very briefly. My name is Jim Hawk. I am the Executive Director here at Neighbor to Neighbor. Neighbor to Neighbor was founded back in 1997 by neighborhood leaders for the residents and neighborhood organizations of Davidson County. We are a community that cares deeply about our neighbors, and we really want for every neighborhood to be a great place to live. And so that is what we work for. We support the efforts of neighborhood leaders, residents, and neighborhood organizations throughout Davidson County. We offer leadership training programs. We offer networking events. I will put a quick plug in. If you haven't registered yet, C4N Nashville is coming up on Saturday, April the 2nd. C4N Nashville, also known as Conference for Neighborhoods, is a one-day training and networking event for anybody who wants to make a difference in their neighborhood. This year, we are focusing on 5 major themes: responsible development, dangerous driving, the litter crisis, homelessness in neighborhoods, and lack of engaged residents or lack of engaged neighbors. So if you come to this conference, you'll choose one of those tracks, and we're going to take a deep dive into each one of those topics. The conference is being led by neighborhood leaders, just like you, who very early on identified that this was an issue they were passionate about, and they have been helping us to prepare for this conference. So please consider joining that day and enjoying what will be a fantastic day. So that all being said, I want to welcome you to tonight's special edition of the Neighborhood Passions Affinity Network. Tonight, when I move around from neighborhood to neighborhood, right, what I frequently have discovered over the years is when legislation is introduced, we really don't have a good, or even before, we really don't have a good mechanism to where we can talk one-on-one with the person who is proposing the legislation. And so left to our own devices, we talk amongst ourselves. Sometimes we totally misunderstand intent. Sometimes we totally misunderstand what is being done. Other times it would have been great if the council person or whatever the legislative person was, to have sit down with neighborhood leaders beforehand and talked about what they were thinking to do, and then getting people's input. And so what we have done most recently is provide an opportunity for council members to come to a table, virtual table, and sit down and talk about legislation that they're thinking about or that they've proposed. And you get to ask them questions. You know, you get to talk to the source who created this legislation, and ask your questions. And if you like it, you get to praise it. If you have concerns, well, you get to raise those concerns. One thing that I do want you to know, Neighbor to Neighbor doesn't have a dog in this fight. Whatever the fight is, our sole job is to make sure that you all get as much information as possible to make your own informed decision. And do what you think is right for your neighborhood. And so that's why we're in this role tonight. We just want to give you an opportunity to ask questions, to share your concerns, and to share your support if that is what you wish to do. So how we will do this tonight is we'll start out. I'll ask Councilmember Gamble if she will share with us a little bit about the proposal and why she did this. And then we'll pause, and I'll first ask people if they have any questions. Now, don't be a lawyer and ask leading questions. If you really don't understand something, we want you to ask your question. If you think you understand it and you're trying to prove your point, this is not the time for that. All right. We will do that during the period where we can talk about the support and concerns. We're going to have Councilwoman Gamble start. Then we're going to do our question period, and it should be pretty briefly. And then finally, we're going to do the concerns and support. And I will say, if it's okay with you, Councilwoman Gamble, if someone does have a question about something you're saying right then, if they want to ask a question, will it be okay if they ask that question?
Yes, that'll be fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I really want to thank you for coming tonight. When I was out and about this week and hearing about this legislation, this was one of these things where it's like, we all need to sit down and talk about this so we all understand where we're coming from. So I really appreciate you taking the time out of your weeknight to talk to us. And thank you and welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for hosting this meeting and hosting the opportunity for me to clear up any misunderstandings about the intent behind the bill or a resolution and to talk about it. First, just a little bit about me. I am Councilmember Jennifer Gamble, represent District 3, which is on the northern end of the county. A very diverse area, includes Parkwood, Belshire, Whites Creek, some of Jolton currently. It's rural, it's suburban, it's urban. So very diverse demographically and otherwise. I have lived in Nashville over 30 years. I'm originally from Chicago. I came here in 1987 to attend Fisk University. Met my husband while in college and we married and made Nashville our home. I live in the Belshire area currently and have lived here 30 years, just about since I graduated from Fisk in 1991. We moved to this area and have been here ever since. I've served as a neighborhood association president, a two council term Metro Beautification Commissioner, also served on the board of the Nashville Neighborhood Alliance and the Nashville Education and Community Arts Television. So I've been involved in the Nashville community for many years before deciding to run for council in 2019. I'm serving, going into the third year of my first term as a council member. So the legislation that I have proposed, RS2022-1326, is a resolution that is asking or requesting that the Metropolitan Planning Commission and Metropolitan Planning Department review and amend as needed the current general plan for Nashville and Davidson County, NashvilleNext, a general plan for Nashville and Davidson County. And I'm requesting that this be done over the next 16 months, no later than June 30, 2023. So that's, like I said, about 16 months from now, where the planning department would do a review of the NashvilleNext plan. So this resolution was initially introduced on January 3rd or at the January 4th council meeting. There was a discussion about it at the planning committee meeting, Metro Council committee meeting, which I serve on as a member, have served on as a member of the planning committee since being elected. Our planning committee, during the planning committee, we had a discussion about the proposed resolution and the intent for it. And really it came about as a result of discussions that I've had within the community with my constituents, as well as talking with other communities and attending many planning commission meetings and hearing from other community members about areas in their districts that either have development that has been contentious or areas that have grown throughout the city. Of course, NashvilleNext was adopted in 2015, which, you know, it's just 7 years ago, but our city has changed quite significantly and grown quite significantly since the plan was developed. The plan has been adopted, or rather updated. It was amended in 2017. And since then, there have been only a few other amendments and reviews in areas across the county, particularly in East Nashville. But other areas across the county where we've experienced a lot of growth and or change in the community, whether it's in District 3 or in Antioch, Southeast, Bellevue, and even areas in Midtown and North Nashville. So in hearing, as I said, from community members in District 3, as well as attending planning meetings and witnessing or hearing from other communities about areas of concern or contention, I decided to introduce this bill as a way for the planning to I guess, prioritize the planning department's role in updating and reviewing the Nashville Next. When Nashville Next was adopted, it was never intended to set in perpetuity. It was always intended to be reviewed and updated as needed as our city grew and changed. And as I said, that really hasn't been done, not at any fault of the Planning Commission. They have, or Planning Department rather, they have had their hands full with redistricting and other development and community issues, and they have not had the full staff that they should have had over recent years. So they have not been able to review the plan as maybe should have been over the years as our city has grown. So what this resolution does is request that we now make that a priority. And what came out of the discussion from the planning committee meeting on January 3rd is that having a review of the entire plan, of course, the plan includes a transportation plan, it includes the land use plan, infrastructure plan. And so the idea wasn't that we needed to review and update all aspects of Nashville Next. That was not the intention. I'm not suggesting that we reinvent the wheel or throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm just suggesting that we do a review of areas where there has been growth or change. And so the planning staff rather, at the planning committee meeting on January 3rd suggested that instead of reviewing the entire plan, that they were aware of areas in the county that they knew needed a review based on feedback from the community. And so they had a short list of those areas, and they invited council members to send in areas that they may have heard of in their particular districts, areas of change or growth that also needed a review in order to limit the scope of work. Again, not asking that they review the entire plan, transportation, infrastructure and all that, but just to limit the scope of work to areas that have been considered as having a lot of growth or change or contention as it relates to land use and development. So at that meeting, the planning staff requested that the council members send in areas of concern to the planning staff, and we would do that over a 2-meeting period. So the resolution that was introduced on January 4th was then deferred for 2 meetings. So for a full month, it was deferred to allow time for council members, community engagement, whether it was, I sent a newsletter. I do a monthly newsletter that is sent to a group of about 700 email addresses that I have. And in that newsletter, I explained the introduction of the resolution and the intent behind it. Also allowing time for the planning department to look at the census tracts and look at areas of growth or areas that they have heard from communities where there's concern or contention around land use. So we did that over a month period. So the bill was intended to come back before the Metro Council at our February 1st meeting. And at that meeting, we were to get an update from the planning staff about their research on the census tract data, as well as the list of areas that council members may have sent in as to be considered for review. However, that didn't happen because the staff wasn't able to attend that meeting. So the resolution was deferred again in order so that we can have that discussion before moving the bill. So as it stands now, the resolution is scheduled for the February 15th council meeting and it is a resolution, so it does not require 3 readings. It is a request that this review for the specific areas that are provided to the planning staff, or what the planning staff has on their list of areas to review, be done by June 2023.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate you giving us that overview and a little bit of background on it. As I mentioned before, we are going to move now into a time of questions. Again, no leading questions. Don't be a lawyer here. Just if you have something that's not clear to you, ask that question. And I promise you, we will get the comments and suggestions in a few minutes. There is one question that came up right away in the chat. What are the specific areas that were brought forward?
We don't know yet because we weren't able to have that meeting on the 1st of February. So we will learn all of the areas that were put forth from all of the council members on that list, from the planning staff at the planning committee meeting on February 14th, and then again on the 15th at the council meeting.
Great, thank you. Anisha or Annika?
It's Anicia.
Anicia, oh yes, hi.
Hi. I guess I'm a little confused about what changing Nashville Next will mean, because as of right now, I go to meetings. I live in the Bordeaux area, District 1. We haven't really talked about any issues with Nashville Next, and it seems like from the meetings that I go to in District 2, it's the council person can request rezonings, and it seems like it's been going fairly well. If the community wants something rezoned, they see it's beneficial to the community, the councilwoman or councilman can do that. And if the community doesn't want something, they can tell them, and then that can be addressed. So I'm trying to figure out, what is the resolution for when it seems like if a community or someone wants a rezoning, they can tweak it. Because I'll be honest, just to make it very clear, I moved to this area because I love the feel of a neighborhood. I do not want the neighborhood feel to change. All I care about is quality economic development along Clarksville Highway and Trinity Lane. But as far as like redeveloping in the neighborhoods, no. And it seems like they are already doing the rezonings for Clarksville Highway. So please explain to me why this is different than what's already being done.
This is not about rezoning. This is about our community plan for the areas throughout the county. So
why is it?
in regard,
why is it?
Hold on a second.
If I could finish, please.
Okay.
So what you're talking about, and this involves community engagement. This is not an attempt for council members to go behind the scenes and change Nashville Next. The process for reviewing Nashville Next, the process that you just described that communities could initiate on their own, requires that the planning department have community engagement, community meetings, feedback from the community on what the plan should be, if any change, if there was a change that was needed. So this is not something outside of what we're normally doing. This is just requesting that the process be done, because it hasn't been done as it should have been over this period of 7 years for whatever reason. So this is just making it a priority to do that in areas where there has been concerns, contentions, or questions about, or growth, exponential growth in a particular area. So this is not any new process. This is the same process of amending a policy for a particular area. It is not saying that the area has to be amended. It is just saying that let's do a review of this particular area, because there are conflicting ideas about what the current policy is in that community. And if it comes up after the community engagement that no change is needed, then no change will be made. But this is just an opportunity to have more community engagement from community members. This is not an attempt to create more development in any particular area. I think that's a misconception about this bill. This is not an attempt to take away rural character. I mean, until we look at, for example, one of the areas that I'm interested in reviewing in District 3 is at an interstate interchange at the I-24 and Old Hickory Boulevard intersection, where I-24 is at Old Hickory Boulevard. Currently, some of the policy in that area is rural policy, which doesn't allow for commercial development which is really in a suburban interstate interchange center. And so I would like to, because I'm hearing from the suburban community, we want more commercial, we want more retail, and then I'm hearing, and then I guess the rural community is saying, well, we don't want anything. So just having an opportunity to get both communities together, to look at that area and to come to a consensus as best as we can as to if we need to change the policy in that area or if not. And that would involve, in my opinion, more community engagement, not less, more community engagement in the process.
We'll continue with questions. I have Ian next.
You unmute there. Thank you very much for coming to answer questions, Councilmember, and thank you, neighbors to neighbors, for hosting. This is really great. The thing I'm still really confused about is the current Nashville Next has an amendment procedure. I put the amendment application file in the chat, and there are community plans. So already baked into Nashville Next are 2 ways to amend community plans. So my question is, what cases are outside of what it could be handled under the current process? Sort of like what Anisia was saying, it's not zoning, but specifically to amending the plan, there's already in place a way to amend the plan. So why, I'm confused about why this is happening.
Let me say one correction. I saw in the chat, somebody mentioned that I said something about developers. I didn't say anything. I didn't mention anything about developers. So I want to make that clear. This is not developer driven. This is driven by council members hearing from constituent concerns. So
Thanks.
Let me make that very clear from the get-go.
So
to answer your question, you are correct. There is a process, and that process has not, in addition to that process, which is like a one-off, if a community has a specific concern about a specific area and a specific development, then they can do that. But in addition to that, this plan was intended to be reviewed over the years anyway, as a result of growth and as a result of growth and a change in these communities. So
using that process, that's exactly right. It was intended
using
to be
that
amended,
process.
using that process.
Well, using that process, and not just that process, though. I think you're making it exclusive, but it's not. It's not just that process. Well, there's also the process of reviewing the plan based on areas of growth and change.
I don't understand that. Nashville Next laid out where we wanted growth to happen. So are you saying that growth happened?
But growth happened outside of what was laid out in 2015. That the growth projections for 2015 are out the window. I mean, what was established then, our growth has exceeded that by exponential accounts.
So did planning get it completely wrong then? Their estimates, their long range estimates were
I think we all did. I think we all did.
Really?
I mean, we know none of us intended for the city to grow as much as it did, fast as it did.
What were the assumptions and what was the delta?
Well, I can't go back to speak on that. I don't work for planning, maybe planning. I think there's some people on the planning staff here that maybe can answer that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Let's see, Grace, you had a question?
No, I'm going to defer. I'm trying to offer a case study in why I think no one trusts the process regardless of what happens. So I think what you are experiencing is that any aspect, any bill that involves changes and development is really frightening to people because nobody trusts the process, and it appears to be inscrutable, and it doesn't really seem to comply with any discernible plan.
And
Okay,
was that the case during the first round of Nashville Next? During that first Nashville Next community engagement process, was there distrust?
Well, I admit to some mystification because I don't know if it was that our council member didn't, I've been fairly active in my neighborhood for years. Nobody in my neighborhood was even aware of the Nashville Next process. I understand that that's not common and that many people were engaged.
No, actually it is. It is
we
very
weren't.
common. Actually, even in my communities,
Okay.
and I'm sorry to
We
interrupt you,
weren't,
but you're right.
I think at that time we had a council member who was not, didn't engage the leadership, and so we didn't really participate in that process. And since then, I think there have been a couple of things in my neighborhood where people felt like Nashville Next was effectively used as a cudgel to do things that people were uncomfortable with. So,
and that's exactly what I've been
freaked
hearing.
out. On the one hand, the idea that there would be we'd be frog marched through some sort of a review during 16 months in a pandemic filled me with fear, because I thought we might even get a worse result than we got last time. On the other hand, I feel like the first process happened not in plain view of many Nashvillians, and that, a more inclusive process might be helpful.
That's the outcome that I'm hoping for. I feel like this process will provide more community engagement and more continuity in the land use policies across the city. This is not an attempt to do anything behind the scenes, but I think just in general, our citizens are more engaged and more aware of our city policies now than we were in 2015. And so
I understand that, but I also think that people think that engage basically means we all come, we speak at the planning commission, we speak before council, and then you guys do whatever the committee of insiders has decided to do, and that's that.
Well,
I'm going to keep us moving here because we've got so many people, and I want to make sure everybody gets included. But thank you, Grace, for sharing your perspective. Kelly C asked a question. And as you see, folks, I'm putting all of your names in chat by the order that you'll be called. But Kelly asked, can you share one of the concerns, issues, or contention that prompted the request for the review?
I did. I just mentioned the area at I-24 and Old Hickory Park, Old Hickory Boulevard in District 3. I can't speak to other communities. And when we get the list from the planning department of areas that were submitted from the various council members, then we'll have that list. But for me, one area that I mentioned is an area where there's an interstate exchange. It's a major street. Most of the area is suburban, and there are policies that prohibit some commercial development. And so that's just one example of an area where I'm hearing on one side we want commercial, and I'm hearing on the other side that they don't want any development. So having an opportunity to have everybody come together and discuss it and come to a consensus is what this process will provide.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and welcome people that want to sign up to make comment, because I think we've gotten a lot of questions. Still have several people here, but I want to make sure that people understand you can start making comments shortly here. And so just become recognized. Kelly, you had something you wanted to ask. Hi, Kelly, you're muted.
There we are. I really appreciate you taking the time to have this meeting. my question basically is, of course, Nashville Next is going to become contentious as development grows. That's the whole point. The Nashville Next plan was set in place to limit the growth in certain areas. So there will be pressure points. That's the whole point. If it was going to be an easy process, then you wouldn't have needed Nashville Next to begin with. So it's forcing city leaders to become creative in ways that either limit growth to adhere to what the constituents at the time decided, or it is set in place that you have to get creative with the development in urbanized areas where people enjoy being densely populated. So I feel like it is an obvious conclusion that Nashville Next would become difficult to maintain as the city grew. And nobody would have doubted that the city would grow because we wouldn't have created Nashville Next. I was highly involved in that process, looking over maps, poring over maps in schools. And I feel like this is already a known concern, and it's just an easy excuse to say an intersection, which nobody would argue with, because if you live next to an interstate, you already know you live next to an interstate. But I feel like it's using an example of an interstate or where otherwise what we know we're all talking about is large multifamily in areas of open land where currently there's nothing sitting. So those are the obvious areas of growth that would be sacrificed for something such as this. Do you have any other impetus for the desire to review Nashville Next other than that interstate?
There are the areas that I'm looking at are interstate exchange areas. They are not rural areas. They are not areas that where we know that the community does not want development. I'm looking at areas where I'm hearing from the community where there are in the suburban area at an interstate change where there is interest for development. But this is not about creating. You mentioned something about our city growing in development. This is not about growing in development. It's about growing in population, growing as a city altogether, not just development.
Correct.
And there are other areas like transportation and infrastructure. Actually, those areas aren't something that we're specifically looking at, but I do believe that a review of some of these areas that have been submitted, and particularly in District 3, will impact changes needed in infrastructure and transportation. I could just think offhand on Nolensville Road, for example, and attending planning meetings and hearing about issues with traffic and developers wanting to develop things in that area, but the community having concerns about infrastructure and concerns about transportation and other things that weren't taken in account in the Nashville Next plan in 2015 that need to be updated. So that's another example. This is an opportunity for improvements. This is not any type of conspiracy to try to change the work that you all did in 2015 or to take away rural areas. It's an attempt.
It leads to it. So like if you were to put in a new off-ramp off of, say, an interstate system, that will in itself lead to more development of areas because there will be more traffic flow to those areas. It will be more enticing for businesses to build there because there would be more traffic flow. So it's not necessarily that you're doing anything underhanded or I'm sorry if I gave that impression. I do not intend to. I think it's natural for there to be pressure points when there is growth. And those pressure points by themselves limit the growth because people will get tired of the traffic in a certain area and therefore development will move to another area or people will decide to move out of that area. So those pressure points are needed in order to limit growth. If you eliminate all pressure points, then growth has exponential possibilities. So
are you suggesting that we not grow as a city? That's what you're.
I very much think that big city is not the answer. I think
Okay.
look at any cities such as Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Atlanta. Growth does not equal efficiency, and growth certainly does not mean affordable housing. There's not a big city around that has tackled that problem. So developing to the nth degree clearly has not been the answer for most of the cities in the US. So I don't know why we would decide that Nashville should also be in that boat. It was a bold move to create Nashville Next, to limit growth and see if we can stay sustainable as a city and maintain good, strong neighborhoods and not become the Atlanta of Tennessee. And if we continue to do that, then we know that route because we have cities as examples for that. Currently, we don't have a city as an example for what we've done for Nashville Next.
Yeah, I don't agree with your, I just don't agree with the assessment that Nashville Next was created to stifle growth in our city. I think it was created to establish where we wanted growth, where what the community wanted to see for those areas. But that I understand your position, and probably we need to move on to the next question.
But if that was the case, then the interstate system that you're identifying would not have been zoned as rural, if that was the case.
Well, I think it was
I'm gonna let Councilwoman Gamble finish, and then we'll move on to someone else. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it may have been the case in 2015, but again, we're in 2022. We have more community engagement. People who have lived in that area for 40 and 50 years weren't a part of those discussions in 2015. And this provides an opportunity for more community engagement.
Gary Moore. Thanks, Kelly. Gary, are you still with us?
Sorry about that. I had to unmute. First of all, Councilwoman Gamble, I was the one that mentioned developer. And I apologize if you did not say the developer, but I certainly thought I heard it. But the point I'd like to make is, first of all, I realize this is just a resolution, and you keep talking about meeting with constituents that had certain concerns. I can tell you, we certainly haven't met with our councilman or anyone else regarding this issue. And I would like to know why we did not have community meetings such as this even prior to the filing of the resolution. And that's the first question, why not? And then as a follow-up question, if I might, would be, it's my opinion, and it's strictly my opinion, but you don't need to open up Nashville Next to address infrastructure. And I think that's what I'm hearing you say, that you want to address infrastructure within the Nashville Next plan. And you can address infrastructure through the council process, as you very well know, without opening up Nashville Next.
Thanks,
Thank
Gary.
you.
Let's ask Councilwoman Gamble to answer that one for us.
Thank you, Representative Moore. I appreciate your question. And actually, again, maybe I misstated that, but the intention is not to open Nashville Next to review transportation. In fact, I initially stated that the transportation plan and the infrastructure plan would not be included, that the planning staff suggested that the council submit areas of concern and have those specific areas reviewed. And in that review, it may include transportation or infrastructure within that specific area, but it is not to change the entire transportation plan or infrastructure plan. So to your point, we do address infrastructure needs, transportation needs through our transportation committee and other committees and other legislation. We do have that option. But what I'm saying is the planning staff recommended that instead of review of the entire Nashville Next plan, which would be a daunting task, and really not even necessary, to limit the scope of work to areas in the county where there has been a lot of growth or change or contention with the land use policy.
And I just want to go to Gary's comment and say, Gary, you are absolutely right. Most council people when they're doing legislation, don't do a lot of community engagement around these issues. That's the very reason why we have created this forum. Let us go back to our council people and tell them that this forum exists, and that when they're thinking about creating legislation that's going to impact neighborhoods throughout Davidson County, that they start here even before submitting. Let's see.
Can I have a follow-up comment?
Yes, briefly, please.
Real quick, I'll make it as brief as possible. I realize the planning commission and what their function is, but I see no reason at all to open up Nashville Next. The planning commission could work with the transportation department, any other department within Metro that they need to deal with interstate infrastructure or transportation or any other issue without having to open Nashville Next to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan Rizzo, South Nashville. Where are you, Jonathan? Did we lose you?
How are you? Yep. Sorry, I just had to get on the road. I won't have my video on, but yeah, I think it's a great idea to review the plan, I guess, and see what has changed, what has, and I do hope there is more community engagement in the process. Council member, will you? I'm assuming there will be a committee formed if this resolution passes to review or see what needs review. Is that correct?
Yes, and I think if we could have someone, Anita McCraig, or I think Greg Claxton is actually on this call from the planning department that can talk more about the process, but it will involve the planning department scheduling, having meetings with the areas that would be considered for review, having community meetings, reviewing the policies and plans, and getting input from the community as to if they are still match the area based on growth or change, or if they need to be changed.
Excellent.
Mr. Claxton. I'm sorry.
I just have a few questions after. Thank you. Sorry, Greg.
No problem. Hi. Good evening, Councilmember. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for delighted to be here as well. I think to the point of kind of what the process looks like, we'll be making our recommendation to council at the follow-up committee meeting that Councilmember Gamble mentioned next week. So generally, kind of the two things that we're looking to do have been discussed. One is kind of make sure that we're not biting off more than we can chew with some of these updates. Like if there's something that really deserves the time and attention and focus of one of our small area studies, like that we've done in Highland Heights or Music Row, maybe on the scale of one of the projects that we did on Murfreesboro Pike last year. We want to make sure we give it the time and attention and not try to kind of artificially force it into a timeline. The other thing that we'll be looking for in any process to carry this out, if council passes it, is making sure we're only bringing forward recommendations that do reflect broad community support. So kind of exactly what that process looks like, that's what we're looking to discuss with council next week. But generally we're very, very mindful of kind of the process. We're recognizing we don't always have kind of the trust of everyone in the county, but recognizing that there are large parts of the county that do appreciate the process that went into Nashville Next or the small area plans that followed. We want to try to live up to and maintain that standard of trust in anything we do going forward. So.
Thank you. I live on Murfreesboro Pike in kind of a rough neighborhood there, so hopefully we'll see the improvements as time goes on. And then, Councilman, would you be on that committee? Is that what I'm understanding? If that committee is created?
No, I, as a council member, I will be attending the meetings and making sure that my constituents and residents are aware of the meetings and opportunities to voice their concerns. But this process would be led by the planning department.
Okay, I understand. And then final question, will the strategic community plan from the continuum of care come into play here at all? Will the homelessness planning council will they be involved in this process in general to look after homelessness,
I think
housing as it's as it
I think
evolves.
they would be invited and encouraged to participate, such as Walk Back Nashville and all the other organizations that work to improve transportation infrastructure, affordable housing, education, and anything else that would impact the community. All communities, all organizations, all residents would be invited to participate in this process.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks for your questions, Jonathan. I see that Randy had made a comment in chat, but I cannot find your comment, Randy. So if you want to say something now, we'll welcome it. Otherwise, I'll have to move on.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman Gamble, for your time and your efforts. I have two questions. Number one, since Nashville Next is dealing with land use policy, will there be an opportunity for areas and neighborhoods and groups to voice their opinion about the land trust that Metro is doing, whether or not that community desires it or not? That's one part. And then number two, how will the plan, and I guess this is for Greg Claxton and crew, how will the planning department determine what is a consensus in the area? Because if you have several meetings dominated by certain groups that are within one camp, say for example Walk Back Nashville and such, how will you determine that you do indeed have a genuine consensus of the area as opposed to just one dominant vocal party?
To answer your question about the land trust issue, that's not a part of Nashville Next. Is that correct? Am I correct in saying that? Okay, so that wouldn't initially be a part of the review because that's not a part of Nashville Next.
Quick point of order for everyone as we're going through. Barbara asked about what Metro employees are speaking. And I believe we have two representatives from the planning department here tonight, Gregory Claxton and Anita McKegg. And those are the only two that are here from the planning department. So that, and of course, Councilwoman Gamble represents her role as a Metro council person. All right, oops, I just see Zach, you're up.
What, Jim, if
Yes,
Mr. Claxton can answer the second half of his question.
Sorry, Zach.
Yeah, so there's not, I mean, I would love to say that there's sort of one perfect way of assessing kind of broad community support. There's not. It's kind of as we talk through with community members, as we listen at the meetings, as we get a sense of kind of what perspectives are there and hear, kind of how people talk about the issue. That's what we're basing it on. Our primary goal is we don't want to bring, I think we would be reluctant to bring anything that's sort of narrowly divided or supported by kind of one small subset of the community. We want something that kind of reflects not quite perfect consensus, but is getting there. But again, this isn't a process that's established. It's something we're still developing our initial recommendations on. So it's a little hard to say exactly like what the criteria is when we haven't sort of laid out exactly kind of what kinds of things we're addressing with this. It's kind of still in development. But if people have thoughts, I'm happy to sort of take those back to the rest of the team.
Thanks,
and if I can also add to that, I think the assumption is this is an effort to try to increase development, but in some areas, it has, as we've discovered during our planning meetings, there are some areas in North Nashville, particularly, where the land use policy supports dense development, and the community doesn't want that dense development. Maybe that was something that was wanted in 2015, but the area has changed. And so this is an opportunity for the community to come together and change the land use policy to better reflect less density that they want in the area. So there's no silver bullet to try to increase development, decrease development. It's just an opportunity to review areas that have experienced growth and change, and to see if there's a need to update the policies in those areas.
Zach, we're ready for you.
Hey, everybody. Thank you, Council Lady, and also Jim Hawk for hosting this event tonight. And thanks to everybody for showing up. It looks like we've had a good turnout. I wanted to comment a little bit about, I think, why people are a little bit upset about this. Nashville Next is the citizens of Nashville's process and their thoughts and what they want with their planning and their land use. And it's our process that planning facilitates. So anytime it deviates from that, that process, AKA council or someone, maybe from the mayor's office requests something, I think we get our dander up a little bit, because quite frankly, council has not done a great job of sticking up for Nashville Next. In fact, a lot of times it just seems like they're trying to find a way to get around it or get it out of the way. Our area actually had to sue planning in order to have them actually look at Nashville Next when they're working on developing areas. But my question is actually more about the deadline. To me, the deadline of right before an election, right before redistricting takes hold, seems very political and honestly seems like it could be developer driven, but I'll let you answer that. Thank you.
Again, this is not developer driven. And the timeline of June 30, the process for Nashville Next took the first time around took what, 14 months, 18 months, 3 years. Okay. That was looking at the entire plan. It was told to me during our committee meeting that that was not enough time to look at the entire plan. And frankly, we probably didn't need to review the entire plan. However, and since talking with planning staff, they believe that that time frame is enough to address the limited scope of areas, a limited scope of work that we're looking at reviewing. So the time frame was initiated based on the end of the fiscal year, really, to be honest, and also trying to allow enough time to review those areas within this term, but before the end of the fiscal year, or at the end of the fiscal year.
Thanks for your question, Zach. John Stern.
Wow, this is amazing assemblage of people here. Mr. Hawk, thank you for bringing them together. Gary, George, Joe, Alice, Helen, Ed, Garfield. It's an amazing group. I wish we were together, because that's kind of where I've always got my energy from these folks. Dearius, Ruby. Nashville Next was an interesting thing. Just for a little bit of background, in 1999, we elected our first neighborhood mayor in Bill Purcell. And one of the promises that he had made during the campaign was to change leadership in the planning department. And he fired the planning director, who was always a problem for us in the neighborhood. And we ended up hiring a marvelous, we really didn't deserve him, planning director by the name of Rick Bernhardt, who came in, and I remember there's a North Nashville sub-area plan update. He came in and said, I don't like this. Let's change it. And we were off on an amazing adventure that only a world-class planner could bring to our city. And he did. In 2013, I went to his office and talked to him about how, if anything, I could contribute to Nashville Next. And I got engaged in the community engagement piece. It was a fascinating process. It was 3 years, and it was many, 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 many meetings and some wonderful times listening to outside experts talking about how things could impact us here in Davidson County. But one of the problems was that by the time we got to evaluating or reevaluating the sub-area plans, which were then called community plans, we had burnt out most people's time and interest commitments. And both the government and the citizen side didn't necessarily participate in very engaged community level discussions. It happened in certain communities where the communities forced it to happen, which was excellent. But in areas like where I live now in Cane Ridge, it didn't happen. And it was only through the grace of God and through the hands of a planning department person who actually inserted some rural policy into our area that we had any rural policy left in a rural community. Council Lady, I appreciate, you came up through the neighborhood movement, and I appreciate everything that you've done and the time you've put in. One of the things I think you might want to consider at this point, I and some of people I work with don't consider it the planning department. We consider it the development department, and that it is in fact pushing untold amounts of development out into your community as well as ours. District 31 grew by 50% in 10 years. So we know we need to address and create small area plans. And one of the things that I understand that the council has done was request that individual council members submit areas of problems with problem transect areas to the planning department for review. I don't know that all that many council members know what a transect is. And so I worry about that. We submitted on the behalf of 31, 32, and 33, but I think my concern is that at this point, we really need to bring in outside consultants and to bring in forward-thinking, progressive outside people overseen by a citizen review committee, not by a development review committee, as the commission has already stacked up against us, so that Gary Moore doesn't have to be worried about the rural character that his community already has on top of it, but that we in Southern Nashville can expect to see more rural character put on the rural parts that are left here in South Davidson County. I'm sorry, I don't mean to monopolize time, but I left a Zoom meeting where we were talking about 130 acres of property, 1,000 apartments, 500,000 square feet of office space being thrust upon into a rural community. And that was a decision made in the 80s by the Metropolitan Council. I think that we do need to revisit the detailed community plans. I don't know that the overall standards of Nashville Next actually are wonderful. If only we would comply with them. If only we would comply with them. And that's one of the things that our friends in in Whites Creek were successful in litigating, that in fact Planning Commission needs to take those into effect. I just stand here willing to help in any way I can, and understanding the history of this whole thing and how difficult it is to weave yourself around all of these rocky shoals. So thank you, Council Member and Jim.
Thanks, John. What we're going to do, I have 5 more people who are already registered. We're going to make sure that everybody gets a chance to ask your questions. We are going to ask that you move a little bit more quickly so that we can make them concise, so that we can get through here in the next 15 minutes. Joe I, you have been waiting a long time. Welcome, friend.
Thank you very much. And Council Lady Gamble, I really appreciate you hosting this with Jim.
you.
I'm in the Scottsboro Bells Bend neighborhood. Believe me, the last 25 years, we've had meetings from Maytown Center, and I could go through the other developments we've opposed as well. So we're engaged out here. We're engaged in Nashville Next. So when somebody starts talking about changing Nashville Next, we're going, what on earth are you talking about? We worked so hard to create Nashville Next. Now, if you want to address things in your council district, I think that's fine. Unfortunately, in our council district, we have a councilman who signed on to your bill who frankly does not represent us anymore. And that's just the cruel reality of things. And we have to work around him. And that's where we're at. But he's had no discussion about your bill. He's had no community meetings about what do you think about this? I only found out about it courtesy of Jim and the good folks here. So it's really problematic from us because when you start talking about revisiting Nashville Next, we spent hundreds of hours on Nashville Next. And I was a little puzzled how someone earlier said they didn't even hear about it because we spent our lives doing this thing. So I want to be sure that you're clear all the effort that's gone into this. And when you start talking about changing Nashville Next, it really is problematic for us. We just see more meetings of having to deal with more issues involving more people wanting to change our rural character, which we have made so clear for so long. I can't believe I even have to raise it up in this meeting. So that's just where we're coming from out in District 1.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. And to your point, there are many community members that weren't aware of the Nashville Next process when it was going on. And that is probably a reflection of the leadership in that district at that time. So I know your district was your area was very involved. I think who was your district council member then? Was it Nick Leonardo then in 2015? Or during that process? Yeah, so, you know, depending on who your council member was and their level of engagement and forming the community is what is impacted the engagement from that particular community. While there was a lot of engagement from the Whites Creek community in the plan, there wasn't a lot of engagement from other areas of District 3 in the plan. As I mentioned earlier, community leaders who have lived in the area for 40 and 50 years were not engaged, involved, and aware of the initial plan. I'm not saying that there was anything wrong with the initial plan. No one is suggesting that the initial plan be thrown out and we redo it. This is just a request that we review some areas that have had substantial growth or change. And those areas are being, a list of those areas are being compiled by the planning department as far as the census tract and any areas or requests that they have had prior to the resolution being introduced. And then since the resolution has been introduced, areas that council members have submitted. I have not had any discussion. Councilmember Hall wasn't at the committee meeting where we discussed the initial plan. So I don't recall him being there. So I have not had any discussions with him about what areas or that he has heard from the community or had any meetings about the communities of areas where there has been growth or change wanted in that area. So I can't speak to that. And I understand and appreciate where you're coming from on that. I can only say that I do have confidence in our planning staff. And more than that, I have confidence in our constituents and our communities that we're going to step up and speak out for what we want to see in our communities. And it is incumbent upon the planning staff and the council body to move that agenda forward. And that's
Thanks.
what we're committed to do.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Councilwoman Gamble. Harry has withdrawn his time to speak, so we're going to move on to George Ewing.
Oh, thank you. I was expecting Harry, so I'll jump in and try.
You're breaking
quick.
up, George.
Thank you, Council Lady. I'm sorry. How about, can you hear me any better now?
Yes.
Okay, I'll stay put. Thank you. I'll try not to speak as quickly. I was trying to hurry. I'll put a question and then a bunch of comments and try and get it out quickly. I feel like there are two stories coming out of this resolution, that it is not any more than a community plan amendment, but then that it is. So kind of my question is that if we're not opening the whole plan, which I don't support opening the whole plan, then I'd like to see the resolution confined to just the community plans in volume 3. If we don't know where those reviews are happening, then I would like to see the deadline in the resolution go away. I feel like it compromises the process. It does add a stink of the redistricting and council election on it. The Nashville Next Preservation and Growth Map was intended to direct growth, anticipate up to 30% growth, and there was a massive investment in this community. And then only give me just a second here. So if the resolution is unnecessary in the sense that these issues can be addressed by community plans, planning has said they don't have the staff to review the whole thing. We don't seem like we're talking about the whole thing anymore. I already addressed the date. I already addressed the Nashville Next does anticipate significant growth. If there is more data coming from staff, I understand how that could be incorporated into this review. And then the community plans belong to community members. So the idea that Nashville Next puts the determination of review to the Planning Commission, not to council. If there are obstacles that residents are having to accessing the community plan amendment process, that's worth a look. And then lastly, just my comments. Other people have asked, I think there's no transparency on this so far. There were no community meetings about this resolution before it came out. So there's a reluctance to describe the specific neighborhood so far before this goes to the next council reading. So people don't understand what areas are in play. Lastly, I really appreciate planning's work, and I'd like to see them govern a data-driven prioritization of these reviews. And that starts with a public community meeting at the ground level, is to determine the resident feedback that Mr. Claxton was talking about whether a review moves forward, and then and what study areas are selected before that review starts. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Councilwoman Gamble.
I don't think I heard a question. I think I heard some comments, and I appreciate those comments. Yeah, I didn't hear a question, so I'm not sure what I'm responding to.
Okay.
We can move on, but the question was that I'd like to see this limited to just the community plans, because I'm hearing that on one hand, this just mimics the community plan amendment that already exists. So there doesn't seem to be a need for the resolution. It seems to be in search of a problem. And I think that having this resolution come before there were community meetings has caused the consternation that we're seeing, and people have responded to as such. So thank you.
Thank you.
Angela, you're up. And if you put something in chat, I apologize. So many comments, I just can't find stuff in there right now. Angela, are you here? All right, then we're going to go on up to Ian.
I didn't have my hand up, but I'll have a question.
I think I saw something in chat, and I wanted to make sure that you had a chance to ask it here.
Thanks. Well, I have many questions. I still don't understand what's wrong with the current amendment process and why this has to be driven by a resolution as opposed to, a neighbor that wants to change the land policy in their community. There's already processes available. So what's broken?
This is just an attempt to prioritize it. Those reviews haven't been done because of whether it's staffing or whatever other issues that has caused these reviews not to be done. So this is just prioritizing it.
Okay, so to clarify then, you're saying to take our already existing amendment applications and just prioritize existing
No,
ones?
no, not necessarily taking the existing ones. It may be some that are existing, but then some are not existing.
Why don't
That
they-
have are areas of growth or contention or change.
Yeah, I guess maybe planning can answer the question then, like,
Okay.
Where are these cases coming from that are outside of the amendment process that we currently have? What?
My understanding from the discussion so far is I think of it as planning has two tracks of things. One are plan amendments that are filed, usually with zone changes, but by someone outside of the department. I don't think the council member is saying that she's going to displace that, because that's kind of on its own time track and own timeline. The other set of things are the small area plans that we do. Occasionally, we're trying to get back to sort of updating them on a sub area wide or community plan wide basis, but we've also done smaller studies like the ones that I mentioned, Highland Heights, Dickerson Pike, Wedgwood, Houston, Chestnut Hill, that kind of thing. And so I think the council member is suggesting prioritizing these requests that council members have begun sending us ahead of those small area studies.
No, not necessarily prioritizing those over the studies, but just prioritizing a review of the community plans in general.
Okay.
Though, yeah, these things that could have been done over the 7-year period that have not been addressed, prioritizing them by putting a date on, okay, now we're going to take the time. We're not going to let another 7 years go by before we stop and look at these particular areas and review if change is needed.
Okay, Gary, you're up.
Thank you. I had to unmute real quick. And I may have just got my question answered, but I'd like to go back to the planning commission guy and ask us, it may be the same question. If it is, I apologize. But the guy from the planning commission, it's my opinion, and it may be wrong, but isn't there already a plan in place to change things through the plan amendment process? In other words, the changes that they're talking about looking at, can they not already be done through the plan amendment process? Well, that's my question.
In many cases, some of them I think might be kind of too broad for what that plan amendment process is intended for. But with that, you need someone to sort of pay the fee and sort of identify kind of exactly what the request is. My sense is this is hoping to formulate more of that sort of through consultation with the community rather than having an outside applicant. So that's one distinction in my mind. But yes, there is absolutely a plan amendment process that kind of folks who are interested can, kind of file a request, and we'll take that through the plan amendment review process into Planning Commission.
Let me go ahead, and Randy had a question that he wanted in the chat. What is planning's procedure on squaring SPs and other developments with Nashville Next?
As part of the review, and let me preface, I'm going to give a very general answer because I don't work in the land development side of things. But generally, when an SP is filed, land development staff will compare kind of what's being proposed against the very specific policy language that we have in the community character manual. That's the 400-page document that sort of outlines how the community character policies that are applied in community plans, what those are intended to achieve. And so it's always a process of sort of seeing kind of the specifics of the site, what the policy is calling for, what you can achieve in a particular development. And so that's just kind of a review that we do in consultation with other departments, water and stormwater, NDOT, that kind of those kind of folks. And so it's essentially they're working to sort of see, how is it supporting the policy? Where does it need to, where would an SP need to change or be modified to come into greater alignment with the policy?
Gary and Randy, thank you for your questions. As I mentioned before, we're taking I went ahead and took everybody's comments that were at the time that I was recognizing people. We've hit the 7:45 mark, which is the agreed upon time with Councilwoman. Actually, 7:30 was, but she agreed to go 15 minutes longer. So I do realize there's some folks with their hands up. I wish we would be able to get to you all, but we just do not have the time tonight. I do want to invite you to seriously consider, because you all are amazing people. C4N Nashville this year, we are really going to be talking about what responsible development is and the changes that we need to see take place in the system to make responsible development happen for our neighborhoods. So I really encourage you to register for that conversation on Saturday, April the 2nd. Councilwoman Gamble, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank
Everyone
you.
else that came, thank you so much for being here. I hope that most of you had a chance to get your comments in before we hit the wire. It's always good to hear from people. So thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you,
night.
Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anita was so quiet tonight.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking the time to handle this call.
Good night, everybody.